There's so much more information we can produce proving that mass media as a whole is in fact majorly influenced by founders, owners, and CEOs of the Jewish persuasion, some in the most prominent and important positions in media, entertainment, and otherwise. We aren't even behind the curtain, but even being in front of the curtain, it's easy to see that they run everything. It's not new information that Jews are the most powerful ethnic group in the world. It's easy to see that, but when you say it, you're racist. I posted this a while ago. I said, "Is it racist for someone to say that the Big Three basketball league created by Ice Cube is black owned? Is it racist?" But when we say that banks are owned by that majority of the banks are owned by Jews, when we say that the majority of sports leagues are owned by Jews, that the majority of sports teams are owned by Jews, when we say that the majority of record labels are owned by Jews, when we say that the majority of production companies are owned by Jews, is racist? It's anti-Semitic? Mm-hmm. See, if there wasn't something wrong with this picture, one would be proud. When black people find out that a company is black owned, what are we? We're proud. Mm-hmm. When a Mexican finds out that another Mexican is a CEO of or a owner of a big company, they're proud. Mm-hmm. So why is it that when one points out what would be the perceived success, something that they should take pride in concerning the Jews, everyone shakes in fear? Israelites today. Now let's get into the second point. We already knew for a fact that the Jews are in control of the majority of things that we are inundated with in daily life. We already know that. And we just use some statistics to prove that. But what about that second point? About that Kanye and Kyrie made when they said, "I know my history. Mm-hmm. We're from the 12 tribes of Israel." Check this out. The history we know, the history today we know that the 12 tribes of Israel were scattered throughout the earth, and the Negroes are included within those tribes. Common knowledge, common information. It was stated in the documentary that Kyrie posted, Hebrews to Negroes. We also know that the Hispanics, Latin Americans, and indigenous people around the world are also included in this nation of people. We know this, right? You see oftentimes Israelites post the 12 tribes of Israel, right? Many would call this racist, which many do call it racist, that we say that we're Israelites. But how many of you know that the Jewish actually state this themselves in their own encyclopedia? Remember, brothers and sisters, we did a lesson. We did a series entitled The 12 Tribes of Israel. We did a series. I believe it was a 13-part series, breaking down the identity of every tribe from Reuben all the way down to Benjamin. We even broke down the 12 tribes chart. Now, I didn't discover this source until after I finished the series. Check this out. If you go to the Jewish Encyclopedia under Lost 10 Tribes by Executive Committee of the Editorial Board, Joseph Jacobs. This is their own encyclopedia. It says here, on page 1. Yes, on page 1. It says, in the Apocrypha, it is presumed that the 10 tribes still exist as tribes. Thus, Tobit is stated to be from the tribe of Naphtali, and the testaments of the 12 patriarchs assume their continued existence. In the fourth book of Ezra, or the second book of Esdras, it is declared that the 10 tribes were carried by Hosea the king, in the time of Salmanassar, down to the Euphrates at the narrow passages of the river, whence went on their journey a year and a half to a place called Arsareth. The Jews know this. This is sources that the Jews use. This is not something that we just use. Notice how they point out every time we bring this source out in Second Esdras, they make it seem like we're the ones who are bringing this source. This is a source that Jews themselves believe. It's a source that Christopher Columbus used. But check this out.
Still on one.
Still on one. As a matter of fact, we're gonna jump. We're gonna jump down to the second page.
Okay.
When you drop down to Arabia, India, and Abyssinia, one thing that I wanted to point out in particular, it says according to Abraham Farisal, the remaining tribes were in the desert on the way to Mecca near the Red Sea, but he himself identifies the river Ganges with river Gozan and assumes that the Beni Israel of India are the descendants of the lost tribes. Now, remember we said in the lesson on the 12 tribes chart that there are people called the Cochin in Israel calling themselves Beni Israel. And we stated that Thomas, the disciple or the apostle Thomas, died, set up a ministry and died in India. The Jews know this. It's in their sources. To prove it, when you go down, it says it is just possible that this may have been some reference to the Sasanam of the Jews of Cochin. We found this after we finished the series. The exact same information we brought you in the lesson on the 12 tribes chart. It said it was further stated in 1630 that the Jews of Salonika traveled to Ethiopia by the land of Sabanation, and in 1646, one Baruch traveling in Persia claimed that he met a man named Malkiel of the tribe of Naphtali and brought back a letter to the king of the children of Moses.
That's still on two, right?
Still on two. Interesting points, because when they say it, it's fact. But now keep in mind, as I go forward in this document, you're going to see that the same sources that they use in the Jewish Encyclopedia are the same sources we used when we were preparing the 12 Tribes of Israel lessons. They're the same exact ones. Now, remember, a lot of people push back on our elder. Remember, a lot of people push back on our declaration that the Afghans, the Pashtun of Afghanistan were Israelites. Mm-hmm. Got a lot of pushback for that one. Mm-hmm. How about there on page 3, there is a reference to the Afghans as Israelites. Actually, I believe it was on page 2, but we're not going to worry about it. According to the native traditions, the Afghans are also identified with the lost tribes, with the lost 10 tribes. They declared that Nebuchadnezzar banished them into the mountains of Gur, whence they maintained their correspondence with the Arabian Jews. When some of the latter were converted by Muhammad. Now remember, we stated before that in Africa, before Mansa Musa, there was a forced conversion of the Israelites to Islam. Mm-hmm. This is stated within Pashtun history. It says that when some of the latter were converted by Muhammad, and one Khalid wrote that the Afghans invited them to embrace Islam. Several Afghan nobles went to Arabia under one Caius, who was named, who claimed to trace his descent 47 generations from Saul, and accordingly greeted by Muhammad by the title of Malik or Malak, king. In deference to the illustrious in deference to his illustrious descent, Muhammad himself called this man Malak or Malik. Right? Now, jumping down, it says Caius was reported to have died at the age of 87 in 1662, and all the modern chiefs of Afghanistan claim to be descended from him. the Afghans still call themselves Beni Israel and are declared to have a markedly Jewish appearance.
This was on page 4.
This was on page 2.
Okay.
Yeah, it says the claim to Israelitish descent is also allowed by Mohammedan writers G. Moore and his Lost Tribes, page 143 through 160, London in 1861, also identified the Afghans with the 10 tribes. So, Elder, what does this show? This shows that the Jews did as much research on this topic as we did. In fact, they did the same research on this topic as we did, because that's the same source we used. That is the same exact source we used. When you drop down to page 3, it talks about Japan. Remember, we broke down in the lesson on Gad that the noblemen of Japan were Israelites. Got a lot of pushback for that one. From MacLeod's Epitome of Ancient History of Japan, published in Tokyo in 1879, one of the most curious offshoots of the theory that is that which identifies the Shindai, or holy class of Japan, as the descendants of the lost tribes. This is advocated by N. MacLeod in his Epitome of Ancient History of Japan. This is like I said, this was published in Tokyo in 1879. He calls attention to the point of agreement agreement between the two, namely the fact that the first king of Japan was Osei. Remember, it said that the Israelites were under Oshea the king, right? In 721 BC, Oshea the king was the king of Israel, right? Check this out. He calls attention to the point of agreement between the two, namely the fact that the first known king of Japan was Osei in 730 BC. The last king of Israel was Osea, who died in 722 BC. In addition to this, MacLeod points out that the Shinto temple is divided into a holy and most holy place. Remember, the Israelite temples have a holy of holies, have the holies and the holy of holies. They had the exact same structure in their buildings. We broke this down in our lesson on Gad. They had the same the red ark, the ark that they have that basically symbolized the red ark that they had that symbolized the blood on the door, the blood on the doorpost, right? The priests wore linen dress, bonnet, breeches, and like the Jewish priests of old in the ancient temple, instruments are used in the Shinto temples. So the same things that they were using in the Israelite priests, they were using in Japan. In addition, MacLeod points out that there is a Jewish appearance of some Japanese, and supplements in his epitome with a volume of illustrations depicting among those things that among other things that supposed rafts on which Israelites crossed, the rafts that they used to cross over into Japan, right? It says, still further removed is the suggestion of some writers that the Australians are the lost tribes because they practice circumcision. So not only do they know the information, and in their encyclopedia had the information that the Japanese are the Israelites, which we brought out, but they also have information that the Australian Aboriginals or the tribe of Reuben in Australia. They also know that too. Oh, y'all thought we were playing with this information.
What slide is that
one on? This one is on, I believe, the top of slide 3. I believe somewhere in that range. Okay. All of these, if you go to the JewishEncyclopedia.com, you can find this information under the 10 tribes, right? I downloaded the pictures so that you could see that this information is actually there, like you see it right there. Yeah, there it is. All of this information is actually there, written in the book, right? So they have the information and the same sources that we use to find that the Japanese were Israelites, and using the same sources suggest that the Australians, which we did a lesson on with the tribe of Reuben, are also Israelites. America, you see it there on your screen. It says the discovery of Central and South America, the legend of the lost tribes, began to be referred to the Aboriginal inhabitants. Garcia, in his Origin de los Medianos, declares that the tribes passed over the Strait of Anai, or the Bering Strait, and went into Mexico and South America. He deduces that their identity from the common cowardice and want of charity of the Israelites and Indians. Both these peoples, according to him, bury the dead in hills, give kisses on the cheek as a sign of peace, tear their clothes as a sign of mourning, and dance as a sign of triumph. Garcia claimed to have many Hebrew terms, and claims to have found many Hebrew terms in the American language. Look at this next source that they use. According to Manasseh ben Israel and Antonio Montesinos, aren't those the sources that we use? Interesting. Put a 1 in the chat if you find that interesting. Manasseh ben Israel and Antonio Montesinos deposed in 1644 before the Bet Din of Amsterdam, that while traveling in Peru, he had met a number of natives who recited the Shema in Hebrew. What is the Shema? Shema Yasha'Allah Ahaya Alahayanawa Ahaya Akkad. In Hebrew, that is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. It can be found in Deuteronomy chapter 26. Right? And who informed them through an interpreter that the Israelites were descended from Reuben, and that the tribe of Joseph dwelt in the midst of the sea. He supported their statements by tracing Jewish customs among their inhabitants of Central and South America. Would you look at that? The Mexicans kept the Jubilee, while the Indians of Peru and Guatemala observed the custom of Levirate marriage. Manasseh ben Israel therefore concluded that the Aboriginal inhabitants of America were the lost 10 tribes. And he was of the opinion that the Messiah would come when the whole world was inhabited by the descendants of Israel. Look at that. Look at that. Now check this out. It says that the Mexican theory was later taken up by Viscount Kingsborough, who devoted his life and fortune to proving the thesis that the Mexicans were descended from the lost tribes, and published a magnificent and extensive work on the subject, Antiquities of Mexico. Didn't we use the Antiquities of Mexico in our?
Sure did.
Interesting. Kingsborough's chief arguments are that the Mexicans and Israelites both believe in both devils and angels, as well as miracles, as well as the use of blood and sacrifice in the same way, namely by pouring it on the ground. I thought Mexicans drank blood. I thought they were cannibals. Never mind. That's what Christopher Columbus said. Also, the high priest of Peru is the only one who was allowed to enter into the inner and most holy part of the temple. So the Mexicans had a Holy of Holies too, much like the Japanese. It says, and the Peruvians anointed the ark, as did the Israelites. He also finds many similarities in myths and legends. Thus, certain Mexican heroes are said to have wrestled with Quetzalcoatl, like Jacob with the angel. Antiquities of Mexico, Volume 7. The same book we use to prove that the people were Israelites. There's another section here, the final section that I'm going to go into. There's another section here with the Jews entitled The North American Indians. We got a heavy amount of pushback from brothers on this one. You know that. People do not want to accept all the lessons that we had, and everybody got an issue with the Native Americans being Israelites. Manasseh B. Israel's views were taken up by T. Thorogood and his Jews in America, right? So they're going to go on to list all of the acclaimed scholars who knew that the Native Americans were Israelites. Keep in mind, all of these sources are ones that we used for that particular lesson. Manasseh ben Israel's views were taken up by T. Thorogood and his Jews in America, produced in London in 1650. He was followed by the Apostle Eliot and his publication 10 years later, and their views referring to the North American Indians instead of the Mexicans or Peruvians were adopted by Cotton Mather, Roger Williams, and even William Penn S. Sewall gave an expression in 1697 to the same views in a special publication. Even William Penn knew that the Native Americans were Israelites. Charles Beatty, in his Journal of 2 Months Tour in 1678, declared that he had found among the Delaware Indians traces of Israelitish origin. And James Adair, in his History of the American Indians, we use that source too, devotes a considerable amount of attention to the same view, which he accepts. Adair was followed by Jonathan Edwards. A special work was written by Ibn Boudinyan, A Star in the West, produced in Trenton, New Jersey in 1816. We also used a Star in the West in the lesson on Gad. It says, and he was followed by Ethan Smith in 1825 and by Israel Worsley, who wrote The Views of the American Indians, showing them to be the descendants of the lost tribes of Israel in 1828. We used that source too. Mordecai M. Noah accepted the Israelitish origin of the Indians, 1837, in a pamphlet published by Marriott's Diary in America, Volume 2. J.B. Finley claimed to have found traces among the Wyandots in Wyandots in 1840, and the view was even considered by George Catlin in his Manners of the North American Indians in 1841. Discoveries allege that Hebrew tablets in Pittsfield, Massachusetts in 1815 and Newark, Ohio in about 1860 were have given fresh vigor to the theory. Altogether, with the exception of the Anglo-Israelite craze, a larger amount of literature has been found on this identification than any other. That means that there's more historical records and sources proving that the Native Americans are Israelites than any other people on the planet. I'm going to say that again. It says, altogether, with the exception of the Anglo-Israelite craze, a larger amount of literature has been written on this identification than any other. There's no more historical records on the Israelites than what was given to the Native Americans, unless we're talking about books concerning specifically the Anglo-Israelite craze. Even the Jews know. They know the entire history of evidence proving that the Native Americans are Israelites. So the question is what Kanye and Kyrie said valid? Is there validity? How can it be anti-Semitic when the Jews themselves believe it?